Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Juliette Young. I'm at the very bottom of the list down there. And apologies to people who thought they were coming here to hear Valeria, which is at the very top up here. Unfortunately, there was a last-minute change of plans and she couldn't make it, and I rather foolishly volunteered to give her presentation. So here we are. But I'm really happy actually to do this because this is some work that we did a few years ago. And I was even happier to hear the presentation this morning by Brian, because the work that we did was around some regional platforms for dialogue, again around wolves. So thank you, Nuria, as well for all your work. I don't know where she is. There we are, because I'll be able to skip quite a few of those slides. But basically the idea with the project was really around the power of listening in order to better understand and actually reach maybe more sustainable solutions. Well, so as you probably all know, large carnivores in Europe are actually doing incredibly well. They're expanding in terms of range and numbers for most of them. And from a conservation perspective, it's a real success. But of course there are people in those landscapes as well, and there are multiple conflicts. And we all know really quite well the reasons why carnivores are doing so well in Europe, and it's basically because of the abandonment of certain agricultural practices, an increase in wooded areas, an increase in ungulates that are a nice prey for wolves, and also, very importantly, in most of Europe, large carnivores are protected at the EU scale and at the national scale as well. And of course this protection has helped hugely in terms of helping large carnivores come back to areas that they weren't previously in, and also expand quite considerably. And the other sort of bonus with legal protection is that a huge number of countries now have some really nice monitoring in place to actually monitor the damage and the impacts that these large carnivores have. What is slightly less wonderful is the fact that, again, going back to the presentation this morning, a lot of the ways in which to tackle that damage are really sort of technical solutions that just sort of touch the very tip of the iceberg and don't really sort of go into the more sort of deep-rooted identity-based conflicts that are around these large carnivores. So probably the most used method really to tackle these impacts are through compensation for lost livestock due to wolves. And this happens really absolutely in a lot of the countries where this is happening, and it's really the tool that's most used. Here is a slide in Italian. And I don't speak Italian. But what I'm getting from this slide in a sort of wild extrapolation of it, is that actually a lot of the other solutions that we've put in place are, again, tackling the top of the iceberg. So they're all around sort of technical solutions like fences, like guard dogs, like all of these things, which, can help, I would imagine, in certain contexts, but in a conflict like the ones over large carnivores, again, it's really sort of putting a plaster over, something that's bleeding all over the place and not going to be healed anytime soon. And obviously, if that's not what that slide meant, don't tell Valeria that I said that. Thank God we're back in English. The other issue that is going on with large carnivores is around communication. And social media is wonderful because we can communicate with everyone, and it's fantastic. But in terms of large carnivores, what happens is that it's a conflict that then gets sort of amplified and amplified and amplified. So you see one animal and suddenly it's become 100, and vast amounts of stakeholders who actually aren't directly affected by this at all are now absolutely in the conflict, and they're key and they're very powerful, and it's all making life a lot more complicated. So what is rather wonderful in the EU is that there has already been, or there is, being, there is a paradigm shift happening. And so we are moving now from a state where it was very much, the experts speaking truth and developing all these wonderful guidelines and that's it, the sort of highly technical, highly specialized approaches, to one where there's much, much more emphasis on participation and on approaches that are much more socially inclusive. Now, a slight caveat, obviously my perception of participation is very different from the European Commission's one, but that's fine. It's a good start. And so what happened, actually I'm going to go back, what happened is that they also set up an EU platform for coexistence with large carnivores, which is actually quite a formal structure where all the key stakeholder groups get together to discuss and exchange, etc., over large carnivores. But what the European Commission has also done is that they've actually funded some local stakeholder platforms where it's much less formal, but there's really an emphasis on building dialogue around these large carnivores. And so this is what happened in a project that Valeria led and that I was very lucky to be part of, where a number of different regional platforms in Romania, Italy, 2 in Italy and 1 in Spain, were set up. The one in Romania focused very much on bears, but the other ones were very much around the issue of wolves and extensive farming. And what we did was that we were very heavily influenced by some work of Steve Redpath and colleagues around really this need to really understand and map the conflict before you could actually go and do anything about it. Because our instinct is always to go and find a solution, and actually, obviously, sometimes we should have spent a bit longer understanding what on earth was going on. So what we did, very similar to other approaches, we went out and did lots of interviews, in this case 54, with 6 key stakeholder groups. And the idea was to really get from them an idea of the current situation, what sort of information they were accessing, what sort of impacts they were seeing, and also what their perception of relationships were with other groups. Right. And what we found was really cool was that there was actually a huge amount of convergence. There was a lot of agreement on different things, including the fact that people agreed that the attacks were increasing because of more carnivores. Information and knowledge was actually quite instrumentalized and poorly used, and often used for the purposes of specific groups for specific reasons. But there was a really urgent need to act. And actually what was also quite cool was that one of the convergences was around the fact that those livestock owners that were incurring the costs of these large carnivore impacts really needed to be supported, really needed to be helped, but actually everybody agreed that the administrations in the different case studies were lacking capacity to actually help. So what happened was that once we did that diagnosis of conflict, we then decided to go much further, and in each of the different platforms we followed this sort of loop, if you like. But what was really key was that in each of the platforms there was a tailored approach. So yes, we had some sort of general ideas of what we were going to do, but then it was very tailored, and that was done thanks to the help of some facilitators, one of which is in the room, Jörg, and who's going to be speaking later on. And they really helped design the process and implement it in each of the platforms. So the first issue was really around setting an objective. And this was really key. This was done in all the platforms, and it really acknowledges the fact that we know what we're going to be talking about. We acknowledge that there are going to be differences. We acknowledge that certain parties are being affected more than others, and it's completely time-bound, and we know exactly, when we're going to just stop talking and actually do something. And this is key because a lot of these stakeholders have been in these participatory processes for ages, and they see them as talking shops. They never see any solutions, and they're just sick of actually spending all their time getting nowhere. So then we looked at themes and positions. We obviously based it on the information from the interviews, but this was really looking at the positions, which is, and if you know about the sort of PIN model, the positions is really what you say you want, but it's very different from what your interests and needs are. which is really where the personal experiences came in. And this was a time for people to share their stories with others, often very, very emotional, very difficult stories to share. And it really started building a bit of empathy across the groups to actually better understand what was going on and how people were living this. And the other way in which this was done was through role play. So really getting into the feet of getting into the shoes of the other people and actually living their emotions and what they were sort of going through in a way that was much more personal, and this of course built lots of trust and understanding. And only then, once all of that had been done, did we actually go into the co-production of some potential solutions. And this was done using a multi-criteria decision analysis through a huge amount of different workshops, again facilitated by professionals, etc. And it's in a paper as well that a colleague wrote. But what was interesting was that the solutions were identified as things that they could do. They didn't need others in a different part or funding they didn't have or whatever to come up with the solutions. This was very bound to what they could actually deliver. So, I'm actually ahead of 1 minute. My God, I'm going to take ages on this slide. No, I'm not. So just to conclude, all this to say that obviously this preliminary diagnosis of conflict was absolutely essential, and I completely go with Nori's, I keep losing you, point here, that it is really complex, but actually we need to embrace that complexity and understand it, because there was no way that any of this could have happened without that initial look at what was going on, because it actually allowed then the design of these processes that helped local communities to take power and actually produce very, very concrete solutions with prioritizations, who was going to do what, by when, etc., etc. And through this process of dialogue and actually using this common ground and these convergent interests, we were then able to move towards these interests and needs of the local stakeholders, even in those situations where we were really stagnating. The conflict was just not moving, it was very acute, it was really just completely at a standstill, and actually this actually helped the process forward. Great. Okay.
I have lots of questions, but we can do that later.
Okay.
Questions?
Thank you for your presentation. So, since I come from a different continent, sorry, by the way, I'm from IUCN.
Hi.
Has there been some sort of a carrying capacity study been conducted? Since these carnivores are coming back, maybe that would be probably a good preparation to avoid conflicts in the future.
You mean a carrying capacity of the wolves in that area?
Yeah, whatever animals could be. This question can be also answered by the previous speakers and the same question.
Yes, so I don't know if Luigi is in the room. No? So yeah, there's been a lot of ecological research done in the area to understand how many wolves there are, where they are, what they're doing, etc. There's the added difficulty in the area of hybrids as well, which is a really key issue. So these are obviously sort of wolf-dog hybrids, and it's actually incredibly difficult to tell them apart. Hybrids can be shot, but it's impossible practically to know when you see one whether it's a hybrid or a wolf. So this is contributing to the conflict, but the ecological work has also looked at the hybrids as well, and a lot of the work has been done by Valeria and her colleague Luigi Boitani as well. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that. Yeah.
Here and then over.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. I was quite interested, did you experience any issues with social media polarizing the debate and these kind of outside voices that you can't control, kind of just making the conflict seem really, really polarized when actually when you're working with local communities, that's not the reality?
Yeah, I think that's something that we see everywhere, and that keeps coming back. I know that there are some initiatives now where the media has actually been brought in as a stakeholder. I think your work in Vercors, you've been doing that as well, or was it Estelle?
That's maybe Estelle.
Yeah, where the media is actually brought in to participate in what's going on, etc., etc. And actually, there's a sort of joint decision with the media of how to then sort of portray the issue, etc., etc. And there is a big difference between social media and media, of course. But that's one of those issues where it's bound with large carnivores, for example. It's pretty obvious that it's going to be taken out of context as well. But with local communities as well, there's a lot of work that can be done to minimise some of these impacts. Yeah.
Could you share the name of the paper? You mentioned there was a paper. Could you share the name, please?
Yes. How do I share that?
It wasn't readable, so.
So there are two papers led by Valeria. So if you look at Salvatore 2020 and 2021, you'll find it. And then the other paper, here we go. Oh my God, that's amazing. This is done. It was carried out by Agnese Marino, and it's I think 2021. Yeah, one-ish, and it was in the Journal of Environmental Management. And actually, in that paper, the whole process of the multi-criteria decision analysis is highlighted. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I should probably also add that in that area of Grosseto where that was taking place, there had also been years of interaction with Valeria and her colleagues beforehand. So that all contributed to the trust and the relationship building with the local community. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.